everybody, my name is Emily and today I'm going to be showing you how I make a ceramic spreader. This particular one is about 6 inches long. It's made of a dark stoneware clay. This is just the raw clay, no glaze. The edge isn't very sharp, so it really is ideal for anything that's soft like jelly, soft cheese, butter, anything that spreads really easy. These are perfect for. So I'll go ahead and to get started, we will need a lump of clay. Doesn't really matter how much, and to do this we're going to start by rolling a coil. So I'll just take the clay in between my hands and squeeze and rotate, which will start shaping the clay into like a log shape. And from there I'll lay it down on the table and start rolling with my hands. So kind of back and forth motion, rocking all the way from the heels of my hands to my fingertips. Just like that, and working along the entire length of the coil to make sure that everything stays nice and even. Sometimes you'll run into an issue where your coil will turn into like an oblong shape or more of an oval shape. That normally means that you're either pressing too hard or rolling too fast, which I am guilty of here. So I'll just take that coil and start squeezing it kind of back into that round shape again. And then going back and rolling and just pressing a little bit lighter. And you can kind of work over that clay, work over any high spots by just applying a little bit more pressure. Now we don't want our coil to get too thin. Ideally it will be anywhere between 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. So let's just double check this. Looks good. So from here, we'll just lay our coil out straight. I'm going to grab that ruler again, and we're going to cut off sections of coils about 6 inches long. So I'm just going to grab my needle tool and using that, slice through those ends. And we're going to get about 2 out of this coil. I'm going to move this down just to keep that round edge. And this little extra bit I'll put back in my bag of clay to save for later. So from here, I'm going to round out these edges just by taking the coil in between my thumb and kind of my pointer finger and just pinching while I rotate. So our goal here is to make what look like essentially little hot dogs. So again, pinching in between my thumb and my forefinger, just kind of rotating to really round off that square edge. And now we're going to start shaping our coil into a bit more of that spreader shape. So taking my pointer finger just a little bit past the half mark, I'm going to start kind of rocking that coil underneath my finger. And what this is doing is creating a little bit of a divot that will be our transition point from that handle to the blade. Now using my thumb, I'll press the shorter side that will eventually become the blade, just working my way towards the end, flipping it over and repeating that again on the other side, just to help continue thin that out a little bit. Give this handle a little bit of a bend to it just to mimic that finished spreader. And we've got a really rough shape. So again, I'm going to take this coil just a little bit past the halfway point and rolling underneath my finger to create that divot, then tapering towards the longer side, which will eventually be our handle. I'll use my thumb again to flatten out the blade and use my other hand to help the clay go long rather than wide. And we'll do this on both sides. I'll kind of curve this handle again. Our goal here is to get as close to the shape of our finished spreader. So from here, I'll take my pieces and place them on a wooden wearboard. I'll wrap this tight with plastic all the way around and let it sit for about a day or two until my pieces are leather hard and ready for our next step. And day 2 with a better camera angle. So I've let my spreader sit overnight and it's firmed up. It's leather hard now, which means that I can apply pressure and it's not going to change its shape, which is perfect for going back, carving, and refining the form. So the tools I'll use are a fettling knife, Surform, and drywall sanding screen. And the first thing that I'm going to use is the Surform, which is kind of like a mini cheese grater and will help us remove a lot of the bulk from our spreader. So the first part that I want to tackle is this blade section, and going in and smoothing that out, refining it, and making it a bit thinner. So just for reference, I'll bring in our finished spreader And you can see that this top portion is a little bit thicker than the blade, which is a bit thinner. So that's what we'll be aiming for. And to get going, I first want to address this top part. So we'll go in and just smooth out the kind of scalloping that happened when we were shaping that blade. And my aim here is to just start creating really continuous lines. So you can see that's much straighter than our bottom portion is. And I'll come back onto the handle too, and again, just work on those kind of transition points. Kind of work those through and smooth those out. And then I'll focus on the side area in between the handle and the blade, just working to make that less harsh of a transition. And you'll see it gets messy quick. We're gonna end up with a lot of clay shavings, so I'll just brush those aside as we go. The next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this over the edge, and I do this just to avoid creating a pressure point since it's not totally flat. So bringing that blade over onto the edge, and then using my Surform, I'll start removing some of that bulk. So just grading away from me, working slowly, making sure things stay nice and even. And I'm starting with just a flat blade, right? Totally straight across. And I'll work up onto this handle portion as well. And then we'll do that to the other side. From here, I'll start to angle my Surform out towards what will be that sharp edge. So we'll start kind of thinning that out to mimic the shape of our final finished spreader. Now you want to be conscious as you're working not to thin out this blade too much, otherwise your final piece will be extremely fragile. So you want to leave a little bit of bulk to it. We can see here that this edge is really starting to thin out. So I'm going to flip it over to the other side and do the same amount of shaving off. This will just help keep your form really nice and uniform, working on both sides evenly. Before we start to thin out this edge too much, I do want to go in and shape my blade. So using that Surform right on the edge, I'll just come in and smooth that out. Now you can leave this to be a little bit more pointed. I prefer mine to be kind of blunter at the end, so I'll really focus on that section and work on kind of rounding that out. But this is a really great time to play around with the different styles that you can create. So I encourage you to do that to find your favorite. And from here, I'll go in and continue thinning out that blade, which is sometimes easier to do actually off the table. So just going in very gently, carving that to create a bit of a sharper edge. I'm just kind of trying the best that I can to make sure that everything really looks even throughout. And now I want to kind of focus on this edge, which is a little sharp. So just coming over it with my Surform lightly and kind of grinding that out. All right, this is looking pretty good. You can see it's gotten thinner. We'll go in and just make some small adjustments. But I think our blade is pretty much done. Great. Now I'll come into the handle portion and start just roughly shaping that. So starting on this back side, remove a little bit of bulk, straighten out that line, and then work towards the end and kind of round that out. Then I'll hit the sides. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little bit of a bulge here. So just doing the same thing that we have been, going in and really working on those continuous lines. My goal in doing this is just to make a form that's really comfortable to hold, something that feels really good in the hand. Now I want to work on the transition between the blade and the handle. We're getting really close to our final form, but I want to just kind of cut in that little nook where your finger will go. So I'll grab my fettling knife for this next step, and just kind of locating where I want that to start, I'll go in with the fettling knife and carve that out. And you can see that creates a perfect fit for your finger to rest, although it is a little bit sharp on those edges, so I'm just going to come back and carve smaller portions out to help kind of round that out, and it'll also help continue thinning out that handle a little bit. So that actually created a nice detail here, which you could keep and use as a design element, but I'm going to remove that portion. So again, just using that fettling knife, come in and kind of carving that little second indent away. I want this handle to be just a little bit thinner, so I'm going to carve the hair more off. And then from here, I'll actually reach back for my Surform to come in and smooth all this out. I'm not sure if you can tell, but I'm really focusing on those kind of edges that we just created, going in and really trying to round that out. I want this form to look really seamless, and those rounded edges are really going to play into that, as well as just making this a really comfortable form to hold. I'll also leave the back end of the spreader a little bit thicker for that same reason. So I'm just focusing on a few last small things, coming in towards the base of the handle too, and making sure that's nice and rounded. But we are pretty much there. So one of our final steps, you can see our piece still has a little bit of texture to it left from that Surform. So I'm going to go in and smooth that out. I'm going to use the drywall sanding screen to do that, and essentially just kind of sand over every surface of our spreader. Now this process is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom through me doing it in real time, but there are a few things that I want to note. Our piece has come a long way, but there is still room for error. Just be mindful that those spots that we went and thinned out are going to be really fragile, so avoid applying too much pressure to those, otherwise you run the risk of breaking your piece. The other thing that I want to mention is this drywall sanding screen is going to create a lot smaller clay scraps than the Surform did. These scraps are going to dry out really quickly, so just be mindful of that. Please only use this tool when your clay is leather hard. If it's any drier, it's just going to create straight up dust, which is not good for you to be inhaling. You'll also notice that as you're working, the holes of the drywall sanding screen will get clogged with clay, so just go ahead and move to a different section when that happens, otherwise you'll kind of continue creating that clay dust, which is what we want to avoid. If your whole sheet ends up getting clogged, you can go ahead and clean off the screen just by placing it in a bucket of water, letting it sit for a couple minutes, and then you should be able to easily rinse all that clay off. I do recommend letting the screen dry before you continue, otherwise you'll end up with kind of a gummy clay mess. And we're done. I'll go ahead and use a damp sponge to wipe the surface of my table, and then using that same damp sponge, I'm going to wipe down the entire surface of my spreader. This will remove any excess dust from using the drywall sanding screen and continue smoothing out the texture of our spreader. And that's the final step for our ceramic spreader. I'll let this sit out uncovered to completely dry before putting it in a kiln and firing it. And lastly, a big thanks to Firebird Community Arts for allowing me space on their platform to share my process as a maker. If you haven't already, check out their website and social media pages to stay up to date with their needs and the different ways that you can support them through the changes that COVID has brought along. Also, be sure to check out the other We Fly videos on their page, and thanks for watching.